Hello, everyone. This is your host, Manoj Tandon, with another episode of Dark Rhino Security Confidential. Today, we are honored to have Brian Davis join us. Brian has a long, illustrious career in cybersecurity. He started off as a contractor with the U.S. Army and as a contractor at the U.S. Air Force as a systems security analyst. And then from then on, he's gone on to doing extensive work in managing risk in security, compliance, business continuity, and governance for SaaS providers, which is a hot topic in today's environment with cyber. He is currently a security test manager for Adobe. Brian, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. How's it going today?
It's going real good, real good. I got to ask you something. Even though you were a contractor at the Army and the Air Force, this is an old rivalry, right? Between the two, you always hear about it. These guys go after each other. So do you have a preference? Is one actually better than the other?
Wow.
I'm just curious. I had to. I don't know
I,
if you follow college ball, but do you have a preference?
I can answer that part. No, I don't have a preference.
Great. Well, hey, give us a little bit about how you got into this crazy world of cyber. What's your background? I believe you have a background in electrical engineering. Is that?
Yeah. So at one point, I used to work in the electrical field.
Okay.
And from there, I like kind of pivoted into communications and low voltage work. And then from there, I pivoted again into the tech industry. And I guess like my pivotal moment into security was when I started doing defense contracting work as a an analyst.
Yep.
Um, you were kind of whatever your job title was second, and like a security practitioner first. Um, I think at that time that's when DoD 8570 came out, and they had like the minimum requirements for a role, and each role had to have like a specific certification. Um, so I was just, I guess overall, I was really fascinated with like the effort that went into like securing these government environments, and just kind of like kept the fascination and the curiosity going, and here I am now.
So you mentioned pivot a couple times, and I'm curious. There's a lot of people out there who want to pivot. Is there a secret to pivoting? Sounds How did you manage that to change from such diverse roles? Is there something you could advise us all on that works?
I guess for me, curiosity is what fueled my pivot. In every role or every place you're at in life, there's always going to be like something you're exposed to or you're taking on or responsible for that may not necessarily be like what you signed up for. Um, these things that get dumped on you, sometimes you like them, sometimes you don't like them. In my particular case, some of the things that I inherited, I had a curiosity for, an interest for, and just kind of took it and ran. There's two ways you can deal with it. You can take it and leave it, or you can take it and run. And I just took it and ran.
That's fantastic. That's a very positive outlook. And it also says a little bit about being comfortable with being uncomfortable. So you don't always get what you want and you still have to deal with it. And I think that's good advice for anyone out there that's looking to pivot and maybe get into cyber, or for that matter, get into any field. If you're listening out there, maybe you want to get into technology sales. Maybe you want to get into tech marketing. Uh,
I think it's a lot easier than what people think. There's the opportunities are out there. I think you just have to kind of like identify like where you fit in or how you can play a part in that. And again, just like just take it and run. Um, Opportunities don't always look like opportunities. So the hardest part is, again, like identifying that this is an opportunity. You have the opportunity to take something and craft that into an expertise or something that you have to offer, something that's available to everyone else.
Yeah, I think there a big hang up that folks have told me that you get into, and it's understandable, is that when you're trying to make a pivot, a lot of times they're looking at a formulaic approach. Like someone who wants to get into cyber, they look at the job postings and they're like 5 years in cybersecurity with security plus, network plus, CISSP, et cetera, et cetera. I'm just making this up, but they look at that and they get daunted by it. Um, and they're like, well, I don't know anything about this. I can't do it. Right.
I I wouldn't get so I wouldn't get really hung up on that. When just from personal experience, when you're crafting a JD, a job description, um, there's the tendency to kind of like make it into like your Christmas wish list of like what you want, like out of the perfect candidate. And one of the things you have to be aware of is that it can discourage a lot of qualified applicants from applying. Um, and I would tell anyone, like, if regardless of what they're asking for, if you feel like you're capable, go ahead and apply. Like, have that conversation. Um, be confident in yourself and who you are and your abilities, and just have that conversation, and that will come across.
I agree completely. That's good advice for all you listening who might be thinking about making a career change. Brian, you mentioned federal regulations and credentials that had come out. One of the credentials that you hold is a CISSP, right? And I guess the question I've always had, and it's just through the industry, is that do you think that credential, attaining that today, is more or less relevant relative to the other credentials that are available for the offering in our industry? What are your thoughts on that?
I still think is relevant. And again, like going back to like 8570, like when that came out, like there weren't like a lot of certifications. There weren't like a lot of recognized certifications that you can get. And the CISSP was like considered like the quote unquote gold standard.
Right.
Obviously, like there's a lot more now. Um, and they cover like a lot of good like areas of expertise and different topics. But like at the time, like CISSP met the requirements for like all level 3 positions. So it was like I had 3 different roles and 3 different levels. So it was like 9 different positions back then. And I'm sure it's a lot more now. But like the only thing you had to remember was, I think, like the CISSP like covered all of them. You didn't have to worry about any. So it was like it kind of like made it a lot easier if you just did that and didn't have to worry about anything else. Um, and with the 8570, it was mandatory. So I just pursued it with the mindset like if any of those opportunities came up, I would be prepared and available. So yeah, and 8570 still exists. So that being said, like the CSSP is still going to be a very valuable tool, but there's a lot more now that are included on that list, and there's a lot of them that get into different areas of focus. So I'd just say keep an open mindset when it comes to that.
Yeah, and that's great to hear it from you, that is in fact the case. Because a lot of times, again, I think a CISSP requires 5 years of industry experience before you can even really qualify to take the exam, if you will. But there's so many other certifications and in so many different other knowledge areas that keeping an open mind, and hopefully employers are keeping an open mind in that regards as well, and realize that a person is much more capable than what maybe some of those credentials might say. You really have to dive into their backgrounds to understand.
There's a lot of those a lot of certifications now have what I think they call like an associate level, where you can go ahead, and I believe it's like the same examination, just different qualification criteria if you don't meet like the experience requirements. Um, in my opinion, again, they demonstrate the same knowledge and ability. You just don't meet the experience requirement, which is just as good in my opinion. I feel like those that's definitely like an avenue to pursue for those that don't have the time experience. You can go ahead and look at those alternative options as far as like the associate level.
You know what? I somehow missed that. That's great to hear. That's a little bit of new knowledge that I learned today. That's really similar to back in the day when I was a real engineer. We used to have the professional engineering certification. But before you could do that, you had to be the engineer in training under an apprenticeship under a real professional engineer. So if you got your EIT, that was okay, right? Until you could sit for your PE. But wow, that dates me a little bit. Anyhow,
The PE,
you,
wow, I didn't know you had a background in engineering.
yeah, aerospace. Back when the Soviet Empire was a real thing. Well, we all know that they didn't have too much going on, but
uh,
we could digress, man. That's a rabbit hole, and we should come back to that, on state sponsored stuff because they're prime players in that space. But before we get to that, you know, if we look at cybersecurity, in your opinion, is this more about having a mindset or is it a skill?
I'm definitely going to go with cybersecurity being a mindset. It's like a continuous, constantly evolving like cat and mouse game, right? So if like you get caught up in if you get caught up on like a particular skill, I think it's very easy to like get left behind. But like if you have like a defensive mindset or an adversarial mindset or both, like I think the concept of security I think it'll always make sense to you if you just have the mindset.
How do you get that mindset into the mind of the decision makers? How do you get those folks to understand that reality? And I'll elaborate a little further because this is a kind of a pet peeve of mine. In talking to hundreds of organizations, one of the things that we still come across, or I come across personally, is that a lot of folks look at cybersecurity as a technology problem with a technology solution. They're looking for the next greatest silver bullet, whether that be the next firewall, the next PAM offering, the next DLP, whatever the case may be. They're looking for a technology to solve their problems. And it just occurs to me that technology there's a lot of good technologies out there, but without the right strategy and mindset to put that technology in the field, it really may not be effective.
So there's a couple parts to this, right?
Please.
Um, that's that's a really loaded one.
It is a loaded
Um,
one, but and I ask it intentionally because I
okay,
want someone with your caliber to answer this one to guide us a little bit through.
so again, like cybersecurity, I think he spoke on like the technology part, like the
Yep.
technology problem. Um, Cybersecurity, in my opinion, is not a technology problem. We have technology solutions, but it's not a technology problem. And the technology solutions are only as good as how they're applied, right?
Yep.
So you can throw a million technology solutions at a single problem. And if it's not the right application, if it's not the right use case, or if it's not configured correctly, or you don't even know what you're looking to, like what your objective is, it's not going to do anything. But the other part of that is like security isn't all high tech, right? So a good majority of the problems you have are like a result of basic hygiene, such as like secure coding, social engineering, phishing. Like in
Yep.
the end, it's people that are behind cybersecurity. Like the technology doesn't go out and attack you, and the technology doesn't go out and protect you. It's the people behind the technology. It's the people that are the adversaries. And it's the people that actually, put the security controls in place and configure them. So it's not really a technology problem and solution. It is, in my opinion, a people problem and solution. Does that make sense?
It makes a huge amount of sense. And I'm glad you said it and not me, because I've said it 1,000 times and nobody listens. They're like, no, we're going to, you know what? We're going to buy the latest AI based platform and it's going to like really take care of everything. But as you said, this is a people problem. It's a business problem. And
the
yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, like, the other part of that, like, you know, at a certain point, somebody's justifying spending X amount of dollars to like implement whatever solution it is,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
What is the justification? What data are you presenting? What problem will this solve? And how effective is it? And how do you know? How do you know that this is going to solve the problem?
So now you've opened up a real can of worms. Now we're getting into compliance and risk,
Oh yeah.
right? And assessment of it, which is exactly your cup of tea. So how do you assess it? Because so many times I can tell you there's a whole bunch of categories of technology buyers out there. You probably know all of them. You got the folks that are working on, well, we budgeted for a firewall refresh 2 years ago and we got the money, so we're going to go do it. And how that fits into, I'm just picking on them. I don't know why, but I just picked on them. They're just going to do it. They're spending the money. It's money without a cause. It's just being spent because it's there. Uh, you have another group of people that is looking at it. Well, we've got this symptom in our organization, and this AI ML based thing is going to fix that. So we're going to go buy that. And then there's a third group that says, well, our industry wants compliance. And we got to check these boxes. I don't care if it makes us secure or not. Just we got to check the boxes. So make sure the auditors are good with this. Buy whatever you need to fill the gaps. There's like, and then, the fourth is just the science project crowd, but they really don't make up a big chunk of the budget. It's like those three categories a lot of people fall into. And what you said is the category that I'd love to have spending most of the money, which is looking at, okay, what is genuinely our risk now, given the fact that most of us are migrating to the cloud? What technologies that do we truly need? What risk can we accept? And how are we going to gauge its effectiveness?
That's this one is I think one that kind of gets skipped over a bit, right?
Oh
Like
man, that's understated.
this one really resonates with me.
Go ahead. It's your floor.
so like with the risk assessment process, it's turned into like a check the box exercise, right? It's
Oh
something
yeah.
that we have to do, because we have to show the auditor we do risk assessments on our supply chain, right? So it's typically like this one size fits all approach where we look at an audit report, send them a questionnaire, and um, yeah, then we go ahead and proceed. Like the one size fits all approach isn't is great for let's just get this done, let's check the box and go ahead and we buy it, but like it's really a waste of time. Um, there's a lot of aspects you have to look at when you do a risk assessment, right? Like obviously, like there's low risk use cases where you're not going to scrutinize it much, but again, like what is low risk? You have to define that, right?
Yep.
You have to look at the product or service that you're using, right, or you are attempting to use or acquire. Then you got to look at like the contents that you're putting in there, or that this product or service will be using, like your assets. That is what's going to like determine your level of scrutiny. The other thing I think you have to take in consideration is adversary intelligence, right? So
That's
you
a
have to
really
know
good one.
your asset. You have to know the use case, like what are you doing with this, uh, to kind of find out what actual problems, what risk, what your adversary is. Like I've had like these really wild due diligence conversations where people were like presenting scenarios that were highly unlikely, considering the use case, right? Like,
Yep.
what happens if, like somebody hacks in here and like steals all of our data? Well, considering like it's only used to house like data that's already public anyway, like it's not really a big deal. Like th- there's multiple factors, right? And if you just gloss over it again, like you're just touching it on the surface, like the one size fits all approach, it's not a really effective measure of risk. But once you've taken all the factors in consideration, again, like your use case, what assets you're storing, what your adversary is, and you've taken all that in consideration, then you can figure out like what your risk tolerance is. You do have a threshold, don't you? What level of risk are you willing to accept? High, medium, or low? Otherwise, we come up with an assessment, we've come up with a measurement, but we don't even know if it's acceptable or not because we don't know what our tolerance is. It's
Well, you know when you get to that, especially the tolerance one is a tough one. I found it very difficult to get uh, people who need to make those decisions to actually make those decisions, because they are signing off on acceptability of a certain level of risk, and something they're saying something could go wrong, and if it does, well, this is the best we could have done, right? Which is in fact a true statement. I mean, you reach a point of diminishing returns. I mean, how you can't lock down everything. You still got a business to run.
there's like that's the other thing. Like when you're doing these assessments, again, like you need a threshold because there is no such thing as 100% security, right? Like
Perfect.
nothing is 100% secure. So if your threshold is 100%, more than likely it's an unrealistic threshold. Um, measuring measuring the security, measuring the risk, you have to make sure that they kind of align somewhere in the middle of right where your threshold is. You just have to be like realistic about it as well too.
And this is such a dynamic environment. So when we look at other industries, we look at accounting, we look at medicine, where there's standards of care. Accounting has gap principles that everybody works by. Those industries relative to cybersecurity are fairly static. Things don't change on a weekly or monthly basis, right? Whereas in our industry, the adversaries are quite intelligent. I mean, we're not dealing with a bunch of people that, are buying guns and knocking over banks. I mean, that's not what they're doing. Uh, they're figuring out where your vulnerabilities lie and how they can exploit it and get away with it. Right. And that
Constantly.
changes hour to hour, second to second. So, in such an environment, is compliance really kind of a false god in many respects?
So, like, one of the things that you have to differentiate early on is what is compliance, right? What
Okay.
relationship does it have with security? Compliance is simply like the adherence to a set of best practices that have been established, right? Compliance is adherence to your governance. Uh, Security is your resilience to your adversaries. So on one end, like you're complying, you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. Uh, the other end is you're showing that you're resilient. Like it's important to know the difference because you can be compliant and not secure, and vice versa. You can be um, secure and not compliant. Um, an audit report is like the auditor's opinion of how well you met the objective, and like security is measurable. So like, okay, say we have an agreement. I have to mow your lawn every week during the summer, right?
Okay.
And like your neighbor verifies, like I indeed mowed your lawn like every week. We have a record of it. I edged it and trimmed it, just like all the details like that were set out in the agreement, right? I was
Yeah.
compliant. Like security is measurable. How well did I meet that objective? Um, like you can take weekly samples and say, out of like the 100 times I cut the grass, you checked 50 of them, and I actually did cut it, but that's not a measurement. It's like, how about each time I cut your grass, I missed certain areas, or I caused like lawn damage from using like a huge tractor. Like I'm compliant in the fact that I did everything I was supposed to do every week, like it was in the agreement. But
Now my
um,
lawn is diseased and less resilient.
right, like it doesn't spell out how well of a job I did or whether I made that threshold for the areas of lawn that I missed or anything else. So it's compliance and security, like you really have to understand the difference and not misconstrue them.
I think that's a fine needle you're threading there, and but it's a really good one. I love the explanation, uh, and equating compliance to resilience. They may not equate, and oftentimes they do not equate, and that's something that you really have to put some thought into. I do think compliance. If you do resilience slash security right, you will land up in good compliance land because you will have put the practices in place that need to be. But it's the dynamic nature that of the field, if you will, or the battlefield that we're in, that makes compliance, of limited. Yes, you check the box, but will it work with today's adversary or what we know today? And that's the $1 million question. And we see it come up time and time again in so many different news reports on who got breached.
Like kind of what you said, right? Like being compliant can inherently make you more secure, and being secure can inherently make you more compliant. Um, but you what you need is both, right? Like compliance isn't going anywhere, security isn't going anywhere. They both serve like a unique and distinct purpose. Like one isn't there to kind of discredit or disprove like the other. Um, but again, like with securing something, like a lot of that comes down to use case. Um, a compliance report isn't a really good measure of security. What you need is a lot more information. You need information such, again, like what is your threshold for security? How are you measuring that? What metrics are you used to measure that? That is how, like, you determine how secure something is versus compliance, which you can, again, like, be meeting all the objectives, but there's still opportunities that exist for adversaries to come in and do their thing.
Absolutely. I I get that. Have you what kind of pushbacks do you get when you have this conversation in industry? Or do you not get much pushback at all?
It's I would say it's not much pushback. Um, Corporate policy like dictates a lot of this, right? So like it dictates what your company needs from my company in order to effectuate a transaction. So before we do business, um, there's usually some type of policy that states that they need like a compliance report, a questionnaire, and like maybe a few other things. Um, you can question that. You can raise the issue. You can point out the facts. Um, but ultimately, it's a bigger problem than just the people that are doing the risk assessment, and it's a bigger problem than the people that are effectuating compliance in their organization. It's bigger than that. I think it goes up to a higher level of where there's kind of a misunderstanding on what constitutes a risk assessment and what constitutes evaluating compliance in your third parties and what constitutes as a security assessment. It's really easy to kind of blend them all into one, and then get none of the benefits of either.
Oh, that's really well said. You often hear, in fact, those terms used interchangeably, and they're really not. Risk assessment is a very different animal from a vulnerability assessment,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Right, which is a very different animal from a vulnerability scan,
Yes.
which is different than a penetration test. And these are all differences. And yes, there may be some overlaps, but by and large, I think the synonymous use of these terms do cause a lot of confusion. And for those of you listening out there, what Brian said is correct. If you do that, then you've merged and created something that gives you the benefit of nothing, essentially, right?
Absolutely.
So let's talk about risk quantification, because you said that security is measurable. What are we doing wrong with risk quantification?
So again, I think there's a misalignment here with risk quantification. Like I think we're confusing risk quantification with due diligence, right? So when for instance, we'll use like your third party risk assessment, right? We call it a third party risk assessment. We're assessing risk in our supply chain. So what do? Like we got like this templated assessment approach, like this boilerplate approach, where like we gather a few facts, we identify like a few plausible threats, what the anticipated impact would be, and take a guess on the likelihood, right? Um, Identifying risk is not quantifying risk. Like the quantification part is still like some basic qualitative approach, which is subjective at best, um, like there's major problems with that. Like it causes misalignment in like security objectives. You improperly like prioritize resources. Like like for instance, what are the chances of like somebody stealing your car? Like there's lots of variables, right? Like where
Right.
you park, the area you park it in, like the car itself. Like what is it, a nice car? Is it a not so nice car? Like you can go by like what the national averages are for car theft, right? Like the chances of your car getting stolen in the United States are 10%. But the national average can be a lot higher or a lot lower than your specific use case, right? So if you go by that national average, there's a good chance you can either overly secure the car or not secure the car enough. But if you take into account like all those other factors, uh, you can find out what the exact likelihood is. That is that is the difference between like the qualitative and the quantitative approach. Um, Again, like the qualitative approach where we're sitting here guessing like what the problem is or what's going to happen or how bad it's going to be, is not really effective in my opinion.
So how do we go about you use third party risk as an example, and that's actually a really good one, and I think it's a very difficult one actually. How do you assess that? Because it is a template oftentimes, and you're gathering fundamental facts, but you don't know the mindset of your supplier. So you don't know what your exposure is because of their inadvertent enablement of certain use cases that you just don't have visibility to, right? I mean, Target, let's pick on them because they've been a poster child. Um, they were breached by an HVAC contractor. That's how the bad guys got in. Now, when you're assessing an HVAC guy, on the surface, you would think, what are the chances? I mean, the guy services my air conditioning and my heating units. And, what kind of risk does this really present? Right. Yet it caused one of the biggest breaches in retail history.
That is a difficult run, right? Because like I can sit here and expound on that, and hindsight is like 2020.
Sure.
But like first of all, like we have to understand, um, there's always risk in everything, right? Like it's a part of doing business. It's not going anywhere. The best you can do is like your due diligence and your due care, um, and trying to identify and assess what your potential problems may be. But there's always going to be like one-off like instances where like I never saw that coming, right? But like to the you know using Target as an example, like it goes back to physical security. Um, how we spoke about how you can be compliant and not physically secure, or physically secure and not compliant, and how you can be compliant and it will inherently make you more secure. Physical security is a large part of various different frameworks, right? It's covered in detail, everything from perimeter security, alerting, detection, um, all of those good things that come with physical security. Will would a good physical security program have stopped this from happening? Like with the escort model, or I'm not really privy to the details of how that went down. But would a lot of that have stopped that? Maybe, maybe not. But in the event that they did have a physical security program in place, and this did happen, again, that will fall on one of those one-off chances of, you're not going to be 100% secure.
So if you're instantiating a third-party risk program in your company, and every company has vendors of various maturity levels that they do business with, how would you can you give us some guidelines on what you would say to people who are trying to do that now, what they should do, A, B, and C?
So, like this will happen. You will have third parties um, at some point during your assessment where you just say, "Hey, this does not meet my defined criteria," and that is the opportunity to put in like mitigating factors. If you're having like an HVAC contractor do work in an area where they have access to something that can cause that level of damage, um, you don't have background checks, there should be an escort. Um, there's 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 a lot of mitigating factors. Like just because something scores as high risk doesn't mean like, okay, that's the end of it. Let's cut it. Let's kill it. Let's put it to bed. No, let's look at that. Let's find out what we can do, what we can implement to kind of mitigate this so that we can go ahead and continue with our objective of having our HVAC system service or whatever your objective is. What you don't want to do is just say, we're not going to think about it. We're not going to worry about it. We just, we need air conditioning. It's hot outside. Let's just go ahead and do it. That isn't the right approach. Again, there's a lot that you can do to bring something or to bridge something or to mitigate something to an appropriate level where you can implement it or use it in your environment.
I think that's really good advice, actually. Don't kill it just because it may appear to be high risk. Look at the flow, the workflow essentially, and see if there's a way to manage that workflow that makes it acceptable to both parties to continue to meet the objectives that are out there.
Never, I guess the other part of the coin is you can't let the risk scare you from like your business objectives. Because again, you're not going to run from it. You're not going to hide from it. And you can't expect every business partner or vendor or whatever situation to be either risk free or risk free up to your level of tolerance. There will be situations where you're going to have to think outside of your status quo box and say, "Hey, I'm going to have to actually do something in this particular case and implement some type of solution, crutch, band aid, whatever you want to call it, so that we can get from point A to our objective at point B."
Now, there, with most companies moving to a SaaS model or moving to the cloud, digital transformation being big part of there. When like for example, if they're moving into Amazon Web Services and using S3 buckets, whatnot they may be doing, how how would you do that as a third party risk assessment, or how would you look at that? Because that's there's this first of all, there's a misconception that Amazon is doing all the security for this, which they're not if you read the fine print there. And two, when you assess that risk, um, how do you do it? Because there's so many things that are maybe potentially not in your control that would traditionally have been in your control had it been in your data center.
That is, I feel like that's like one where it doesn't really get attention for the fact that a lot of people feel like there's no alternative. Um, if you want the cloud, that's part of doing business in the cloud. Um, Otherwise, stay on prem and you deal with the limitations and the risk and the problems associated with
Sure.
having an on prem environment. Um, AWS or any cloud provider, I would approach that with the same way I would approach risk analysis and due diligence for any other situation, product, or engagement. Um, know your adversary, know your asset, like what the adversary is after, and know your potential outcomes and how bad they can be. Um, know what your other options are as far as mitigating factors or mitigating controls. Maybe a hybrid approach is best for you if you're really concerned about like AWS. Um, again, like don't feel like you don't have any options, because like if you want cloud, you're just kind of stuck with um, whatever cloud providers are out there and whatever type of security or service they offer. And be aware. Like if you grab, again, like compliance reports are great. Like if you grab like an AWS SOC report, you can look at the scope of, or AWS or anybody, the scope of the examination, um, what the inherent limitations are, and what, as far as like on the security end of the spectrum, they're responsible for and what you will be responsible for. They're good for that. Just be really aware of what you're putting yourself into, and just make decide accordingly. Move forward from there. But again, don't feel like um, you don't have any mitigating options if it's not what you want.
And, I like the fact, you're saying go look at those SOC reports, use them as part of your due diligence, but maybe not necessarily use them to measure security, because once you have that framework of what they're doing, then you apply your own assessment against it as to what you perceive the risk to be and securing that risk. And that may not be the same as what the audit report is showing necessarily.
Yeah, they're again, like it's knowing what they're, I guess, knowing the right tool for the right job, right? So yeah, the SOC report would definitely be good for that, and good for a number of other things useful for making decisions.
So, Brian, we're coming up here on the hour. I wanted to give you a couple minutes to plug anything that you'd like to. I don't know if you're going to be doing any talks, if your appearances, working with charities, anything you'd like to let our audience be aware of that you would like to have their support on.
Yeah, absolutely. No upcoming appearances or talks or anything like that, but I'll continue to do what we've been doing now. Also, like look forward to seeing like a blog in the future with myself and Ray Barchenner, who you've met. We're planning on having like more open discussions on like the various pain points in like the security space, and I'll also be speaking more about effective ways to measure security and to make intelligent decisions based on like test information. Um, yeah, so I have that, and you can always find me on LinkedIn, where we will be posting these conversations and having these discussions.
Yeah, and let us know as some of those things become available. We'll be happy to post them out there and let everybody know.
Absolutely.
We appreciate the work that you're doing and appreciate you taking the time today to give us a little bit of knowledge.
Oh, thank you, Manoj. It was a pleasure and an honor for you to have me here and to sit down and speak with you.
Thank you. As we head into the winter, stay warm, and we'll look forward to having you back possibly as you get some of these things out there, and you can guide us on some of the tools you're developing or the methods that you're publishing out there.
Absolutely. I'd be honored to.
Sounds great. Well, take care, Brian.
Likewise. You take care and have a good one.
You too.